King Josiah's men went down into a ravine outside Jerusalem with hammers and made it unfit to ever be used again. 2 Kings 23, verse 10. The place was called Topheth, in the valley of the son of Hinnom. 400 years later, a carpenter from Nazareth stood within sight of that valley and used its name 12 times. In Hebrew, that valley is Gehenna. In Greek, it comes out Gehenna. Tonight, I am going to show you the 3 other words your English Bible also prints as hell. 4 different words, 1 English word, and they do not mean the same thing. Let me be plain about what this hour is, because the subject is one where people brace up before you get a sentence out. This is not a video about who goes where. I am not going to argue a doctrine of the afterlife tonight in any direction. Not the traditional one, not any of the alternatives. That is not what I am qualified to do, and it is not what I came to do. And if that is what you are looking for, there are men far better trained than me, and you should go listen to several of them, and not just one. What this is a translation problem, a vocabulary problem, a matter of what is on the page in Hebrew and Greek and what came out the other side in English. And it is checkable. Every single thing I say tonight, you can verify with a concordance, and one evening, and I am going to keep telling you the chapter and verse, so you can. Here is the shape of it. There are 4 different words in the original languages that your King James Bible renders with the English word hell. One of them is Hebrew and appears about 65 times. One of them is Greek and appears about 11. One of them is the name of that ravine, and it appears 12 times, and 11 of those are from one man's mouth. And one of them appears exactly once in the whole New Testament, and it is not about people at all. 4 doors, 1 sign over all of them. Now, that is not a scandal, and nobody is being accused of anything. I will get to how the 1611 men worked, and why they did what they did, and it is a more sympathetic story than you might expect. But it does mean that when you read the English word hell, you cannot tell which of the 4 you're looking at. The difference is off the page, and the differences are not small. So, 4 words, in order, what each one is, where it comes from, how many times it appears, and in whose mouth. And I am holding one thing to the very end. There is a verse in the last book of your Bible where the English says, hell was cast into the lake of fire. Read that sentence twice, and you will see the problem. And when we get there, I will show you what word is actually underneath it. The rule I am working under, said out loud so you can hold me to it. Words and contexts. That is all. I am going to take each of the 4, tell you how many times it occurs, and read you the places it stands, so you can hear how it is being used. I am not going to tell you what happens to anybody after they die. Not because I am dodging, because the counting is a thing I can actually do, and the other is not, and I have learned the hard way to stay inside what I can do. Now, why does 1 English word for 4 originals matter? Let me give you a plain example from ordinary life, because the principle is not religious at all. Suppose you had a language that used the same word for a jail, a graveyard, a courthouse, and a specific field outside of town where something terrible happened once. 1 word for all 4. And suppose somebody read you a story in that language, and every time the word came up, you pictured the jail. You would follow that story confidently, and you would be wrong about half of it. Not because anybody deceived you, because the distinctions were made in a room you were not in, the translator's room, and by the time the page reached you, they were gone. That is the situation, and the reader cannot detect it from the inside. There is no footnote in most Bibles. The word just says hell, and you read on. Now, let me be fair to the men who did it. because I am not here to run down the King James translators, and I would not have their job for anything. 16:11. 6 companies of scholars, 40-some men, working from Hebrew and Greek, and from 100 years of English Bible tradition already behind them. Tyndale, Coverdale, the Geneva Bible. They were not starting from a blank page. They inherited an English vocabulary for these things, and hell was already the standard English rendering. And here is the part almost nobody knows. The English word hell in 1611 was broader than it is now. It comes from an old Germanic root that has to do with covering or concealing, the same family that gives us to heli, an old word for covering something over. In Older English, you could speak of helling potatoes, meaning burying them for the winter. A hell was a hidden or covered place. So when a man in 1611 read hell, the word in his head had more room in it than the word in yours does. It could carry the grave. It could carry the unseen place of the dead. It did not automatically mean fire. 400 years happened to that word. It narrowed, and the Bible kept printing it. That is not a conspiracy. That is what happens to language, and it happens to every language, and translators cannot chase it forever. And I want you to know that the field has moved on this. Pick up most modern translations, and you will find Sheol and Hades simply transliterated, left as the foreign words they are, with a footnote. Some render Sheol as the realm of the dead. Different committees handle it differently, and they tell you what they did in the preface. Let me tell you the question I could not answer, because it is why I did the work. 2018, Memphis. A funeral at a church I do not belong to. I was there for a friend, and afterward a young man, 19, maybe 20, the grandson, asked me where his grandmother was right at that moment. Not a theology question. He wanted to know where she was, the way you ask where somebody is who has gone to the store. And what came out of my mouth was a mix of about 4 things I had heard in my life, and I could hear myself doing it. I quoted a verse with the word hell in it, and a verse with the word sleep in it, and a verse about being absent from the body. And I put them together into a sentence that sounded pastoral and was, I realized in the car, not one thing. It was a stack. I could not have told you that afternoon that 3 of those verses had 3 different words underneath them. That is when I started counting. Not to get a better answer for him. I do not have one, and I told him so the next time I saw him, to stop myself from ever again handing a grieving person a stack and calling it an answer. So, 4 words, and I am not qualified to tell you where anybody is. I am qualified to count and to read out loud, and that is what the rest of this hour is. Word 1, Sheol, Hebrew, Old Testament only. And it appears about 65 times. I say about because the counts you will see differ by 1 or 2 depending on how a couple of debated spots are handled. And I would rather give you a hedged number than a confident wrong one. 65 occurrences. And here is the fact that started this whole project for me. Your King James Bible renders that one Hebrew word with 3 different English words. Hell, grave, pit. Roughly half the time it is hell. Roughly half the time it is grave. And 3 times it is pit. 1 word underneath, 3 words on top, and nothing on the page tells you. Sit with what that does to a reader for a second. You are reading along in Job, and the word grave goes by, and you picture a hole in the ground with a stone over it. Then you are reading in Psalms, and the word hell goes by, and you picture something else entirely. Fire, probably. Punishment, certainly. Same word in the Hebrew. 2 completely different pictures in your head, and the difference came from the translator, not from David. Now let me show you what I mean with the passages themselves, because this is the kind of thing that stays abstract until you hear it in place. Genesis chapter 37. Joseph's brothers have sold him and dipped his coat in goat's blood and brought it back to their father. Verse 34. And Jacob rent his clothes and put sackcloth upon his loins and mourned for his son many days. Then verse 35. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted. And he said, For I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning. I will go down into the grave unto my son. The Hebrew word there is Sheol. Now look at who is speaking and what he is saying. This is Jacob, Israel, the patriarch, the man the nation is named after. He believes his son is dead. And he says he expects to go down to Sheol himself, and he expects his son to be there. He is not describing punishment. He is not afraid of the place. He is saying, Wherever my boy has gone, I am going there too, and I will go there grieving. That is the first thing to understand about this word. It is where the dead are. All of them. The patriarch expects to go, and the patriarch is not worried about the destination. He is grieving the company. Your English Bible prints grave there, which is a reasonable choice, and I am not fighting it. But hold on to it, because in about 4 minutes I am going to read you a verse where the very same Hebrew word gets printed hell, and you will feel the seam. Now the third rendering, and this one only happens 3 times, which is what makes it so useful for seeing the machinery. Numbers, chapter 16. Korah and Dathan and Abiram have risen up against Moses, and 250 men of renown with them. And Moses says something extraordinary. He says, If these men die the common death of all men, then the Lord hath not sent me. Then verse 31. And it came to pass, as he had made an end of speaking all these words, that the ground clave asunder that was under them, and the earth opened her mouth, and swallowed them up, and their houses, and all the men that appertained unto Korah, and all their goods. They, and all that appertained to them, went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed upon them, and they perished from among the congregation. Went down alive into the pit. Sheol. Same word Jacob used about himself. And here your King James prints pit, which gives you a hole in the ground opening in the dirt, which is exactly what the scene describes. It is a fine translation of that moment. But now, hold the 3 side by side and look at what a reader is handed. Jacob. I will go down into the grave. Sheol. Korah went down alive into the pit. Sheol. And in a few minutes, David. Thou wilt not leave my soul in hell. Sheol. Grave, pit, hell. 3 English words. 1 Hebrew word. 3 completely different scenes in the mind of anybody reading in English, and no way at all for that reader to know they are looking at the same thing. That is the whole finding of this segment, and I want it to be concrete before we go on. And there is a 4th passage I have to give you, because it is the one that makes the whole problem unmissable. Jonah, chapter 2. The man has been thrown overboard and swallowed, and he prays from inside the fish. Verse 2. I cried by reason of mine affliction unto the Lord, and he heard me. Out of the belly of hell cried I, and thou heardest my voice. Out of the belly of hell. Sheol. And Jonah is not dead. He is in a fish, in the sea, alive and talking. He is using the word the way a man uses it when he means, I was as good as gone. I was in the grave's mouth. The rest of the prayer says the same thing. The waters compassed me about, the weeds were wrapped about my head. I went down to the bottoms of the mountains. The earth with her bars was about me forever. That is a man describing death closing over him. It is not a man describing a place of punishment, and nobody has ever read it that way. And yet the English on your page says hell. 4 passages now: Jacob's grave, Korah's pit, Jonah's hell, and one more coming. One Hebrew word behind every one of them. So, what does the word actually mean in Hebrew? Let me give you the plainest description the reference works give, and then tell you where the uncertainty is. Sheol is the realm of the dead, where the dead are. It is spoken of as down. You go down to Sheol, never up. It is spoken of as dark. It is spoken of as a place of silence and of dust. Job calls it the land of darkness and the shadow of death. It has gates in some passages. It is sometimes personified with a mouth that opens and an appetite that is never satisfied. Proverbs 27 verse 20 says, "Hell and destruction are never full," and it is spoken of as the destination of everybody. That is the part that surprises people raised on the English word. In the Old Testament, righteous people go to Sheol, and wicked people go to Sheol. Jacob expects it. David speaks of it. It is not sorted. Now the honest limit. The etymology of the word itself, where it comes from, what root it is built on, is genuinely disputed. You will see proposals connecting it to a verb, meaning to ask or to inquire, and others connecting it to a root about hollowness or a hollow place, and neither is settled. So when somebody tells you Sheol means the place of asking, understand that is one proposal among several. What is not disputed is how the word is used, because we have 65 occurrences to look at, and use is what tells you meaning. And how it is used is, where the dead are. Now who goes there? Because this is where the English word does the most damage. Job, chapter 14. Job is in the middle of the worst thing that has ever happened to a man in Scripture, and he says something that will not fit inside the English word hell at all. Verse 13, "Oh, that thou wouldest hide me in the grave, that thou wouldest keep me secret, until thy wrath be past, that thou wouldest appoint me a set time, and remember me. Hide me in the grave." Sheol. Job is asking to be put there. Read that again with the other English word in it, and hear how it breaks. "Oh, that thou wouldest hide me in hell." Nobody prays that. Nobody has ever prayed that, but it makes perfect sense with the word Job actually used. He is saying, "Put me where the dead are, tuck me away. Let the storm pass over the top of me, and then set a time, and then remember me and bring me back up." He is asking for shelter, a righteous man, asking God to hide him among the dead until things blow over. You cannot get that out of an English Bible unless somebody tells you what word is underneath. And that is the whole reason I am doing this hour. And there is one more that I think is the most beautiful use of the word in the whole Old Testament, and it is in a psalm everybody knows. Psalm 139. This is the one about being searched and known. "Thou knowest my downsitting and mine uprising. Thou understandest my thought afar off." Verse 8. "If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell." Sheol. Now read that with the English word as most people hear it today, and it becomes a strange, almost defiant sentence, as if David is saying, even in the place of punishment, God would find him. Read it with the word he actually used, and it is something else entirely. "If I go up to the sky, you are there. If I make my bed among the dead, you are there too. Make my bed." That is a domestic image. Lying down, where a man lies down to sleep at the end. The whole psalm is a list of places a person might go. The heavens, the grave, the wings of the morning, the uttermost parts of the sea, the darkness, and the point of every line is that none of them is out of reach. Sheol is on that list as one more place, and the promise is that it is not far enough away either. Now, Ecclesiastes, and this one is bleak, and I am going to read it as it stands, rather than soften it. Chapter 9, verse 10. Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave whither thou goest. Sheol again. No work, no device, no knowledge, no wisdom. And the Psalms say similar things. Psalm 6, verse 5. For in death there is no remembrance of thee. In the grave who shall give thee thanks? Psalm 115, verse 17. The dead praise not the Lord, neither any that go down into silence. Now I want to handle this carefully, because this is exactly the point where a video like mine could go somewhere I said I would not go. I am not going to tell you what those verses settle about the state of the dead. There are serious believers who read them one way, and serious believers who read them another, and the argument is old, and it is not mine. What I will say, and this is a matter of observation rather than doctrine, is that the Old Testament says remarkably little about what happens in Sheol. Compared to the volume of material about how to live, about justice, about the covenant, about the land, the material about the afterlife is thin. It is mostly silence and dust and down. That is not a gap somebody removed. It is a book with a different center of gravity than the one we usually bring to it. And then there is one verse where the word turns, and I have to tell you what it did to me. Psalm 16, verse 10. For thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. Hell, Sheol, same word as Jacob's grave and Korah's pit. Winter of 2021, at the desk in my back room in Memphis. And I had been at this for a couple of months. And I got to that verse, and I sat back. Because I had heard that verse preached my whole life as a verse about Christ not being abandoned in the place of torment. That is how it came to me at 9 years old in the Delta. And that is how I carried it for 50 years. And the word is the word Jacob used about going down to be with his boy. Here is where I landed, and you may land elsewhere. Read it as Sheol, and the verse is not smaller, it is larger. Thou wilt not leave my soul among the dead. Thou wilt not let me stay in the place where everybody goes. That is a resurrection sentence. That is somebody saying the ordinary destination of all flesh will not be the end of this one. I have been reading A Rescue from a Prison. It reads to me now as a rescue from the grave, which is the thing that actually has all of us. And that is not just my reading, because the apostles reach for that exact verse. Acts chapter 2, Pentecost. Peter is standing up in front of the crowd, and he quotes Psalm 16 out loud, verses 25 through 28, and then in verse 31 he applies it. He, seeing this before, spake of the resurrection of Christ, that his soul was not left in hell, neither his flesh did see corruption. Peter is arguing resurrection from that verse. And the Greek word in his mouth, the word the Greek Old Testament used to translate Sheol, is our second word. Word 2, Hades. And the first thing to know is that it did not come into the Bible from Greek mythology. It came in as a translation. A couple of centuries before Christ, in Alexandria, Jewish scholars translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, the version usually called the Septuagint. And when they came to Sheol, they had to pick a Greek word for it. They picked Hades, and they picked it consistently, over and over, throughout the Old Testament. Now, in ordinary Greek usage, Hades was the realm of the dead, not a place of fire, not a punishment facility. The unseen place where the dead go, all of them, which is precisely why those translators chose it. It was the closest word in Greek to what Sheol was doing in Hebrew. So by the time the New Testament writers pick up a pen, Hades is already the standard word for Sheol. They are not importing Greek mythology. They are using the vocabulary of the Bible they read. That matters, and it is the piece most people are never told. Now, where does it appear? Around 10 or 11 times in the New Testament, depending on which manuscripts your translation follows, in a couple of spots. I hedge that the way careful reference works do, and the longest scene by far is Luke 16, the rich man and Lazarus. A rich man clothed in purple and fine linen, faring sumptuously every day. A beggar at his gate, full of sores, desiring to be fed with the crumbs. Both men die. The beggar is carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man is buried. Verse 23, and in hell he lift up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. Hades. That is the word. And I am going to do here exactly what I said I would do at the top of this hour. Describe it and stop. Readers disagree about what kind of passage that is. Some hold it is a parable, using a story world that Jesus' hearers already knew, to make a point about wealth, and about a rich man who would not cross a doorstep to help a man who was dying on it. Some hold it is an account of an actual state. I am not settling that, and I want to name plainly that people I respect are on both sides and always have been. What I am pointing at is one thing only, the word on the page. It is Hades, and Hades is the word the Greek Bible used for Sheol, and the English prints it hell. Now Revelation, where Hades turns up more than anywhere else. Chapter 1, verse 18. The risen Christ speaking. I am he that liveth and was dead. And, behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen. And have the keys of hell and of death. The keys of hell and of death. Hades and death paired. And they stay paired all through that book. Chapter 6, verse 8, the fourth seal. And I looked, and behold a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. Death rides and Hades follows after. Two figures, always together, like a man and his cart. And there are two more occurrences of this word that you know by heart, and I would bet almost nobody watching knew which word was under them. The first is Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. Peter has just said, Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answers him, And I say also unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. The gates of hell. Hades, the realm of the dead. Now read the image again with that in place. Gates, not weapons, gates. Gates are what a city has, and gates do not attack anybody. Gates hold things in and keep things out. So the picture is not an army of demons charging a church. The picture is a church coming up against the gates of the place that holds the dead, and those gates not holding. I heard that verse preached for 50 years as a promise about spiritual warfare. It may be that too, but the noun is Hades, and the image is a door. And the promise is about something that has held every human being who ever lived, and is not going to hold. The second one is Matthew 11, verse 23, and it has a bite in it. And thou, Capernaum, which art exalted unto heaven, shalt be brought down to hell. For if the mighty works which have been done in thee had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. Exalted unto heaven, brought down to Hades. That is a quotation of a pattern out of Isaiah 14, the same up and then down shape used against the king of Babylon. It is a taunt form, and the town it is aimed at is Capernaum, which is where Jesus lived and worked, and where most of his miracles happened. He uses this word about his own hometown congregation, so to speak, not about a foreign empire. Now here is the thing I want planted before we leave this word, and I am going to leave it planted and not spend it. In the book of Revelation, Hades and the lake of fire are not the same thing. They are two different items, named separately. And at the end of that book, one of them happens to the other. I will read you the verse in the last stretch of this hour. For now, just notice what your English page cannot show you. When the King James says hell in Revelation 20, and says hell in Luke 16, and says hell in Matthew 5, those are not all the same word underneath. Two of them are Hades. One of them is something else entirely. And that something else is a piece of ground outside Jerusalem that a king took hammers to. Word 3. And this one is not a concept. It is a piece of ground. Let me put you on it. Jerusalem sits on high ground with valleys cutting around it. On the east side runs the Kidron, between the city and the Mount of Olives. And on the south and the west runs another one, a ravine, steep-sided, that curls around the bottom of the old city and meets the Kidron at the southeast corner. That second ravine is the valley of the son of Hinnom. In Hebrew, G ben Hinnom, usually shortened to G Hinnom. And it is not a mythological location. It is a boundary marker. Joshua, chapter 15, verse 8, laying out the border of the tribe of Judah. And the border went up by the valley of the son of Hinnom unto the south side of the Jebusite. The same is Jerusalem. And Joshua 18, verse 16, does the same thing from the other tribe's side. That is how you know it is real. Surveyors use it. When somebody is writing down where one tribe's land stops and another's starts, they say, it runs up the valley of the son of Hinnom. You cannot draw a property line off a metaphor. You can walk it today. People do. It is a green ravine now, with paths in it. Now, what happened there? 2 Kings chapter 23. Josiah is king. He is 8 years into the great reform. The book of the law has been found in the temple and read to him, and he has torn his clothes. And he goes through the country, pulling down everything. Verse 10. And he defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the children of Hinnom, that no man might make his son or his daughter to pass through the fire to Molech, that no man might make his son or his daughter to pass through the fire. I am going to say this plainly, and then I am going to move, because it does not need dwelling on, and I will not do that to you. Children were killed in that ravine, in fire, as offerings. That is what the text says was happening there. And Josiah went down and wrecked the place so it could never be used for it again. The word defiled means he made it ritually unusable, and other accounts say he filled it with bones. And it was not one bad king. 2 Kings 16 verse 3 says Ahaz made his son to pass through the fire. 2 Kings 21 verse 6 says Manasseh did the same, grandfather and father. 2 generations of the royal house of Judah, and Josiah is the grandson cleaning it up. And the prophets knew that ground by name too, not only Jeremiah. Isaiah chapter 30 verse 33. For Tophet is ordained of old, yea, for the king it is prepared. He hath made it deep and large. The pile thereof is fire and much wood. The breath of the Lord, like a stream of brimstone, doth kindle it. Tophet is ordained of old, deep and large, fire and much wood. That is Isaiah, in the 8th century before Christ, using the name of that specific burning place as an image of judgment. And notice who he says it is prepared for the king. In context, that is the Assyrian, the empire that had just come down on the land. So the imagery of fire attached to that ravine is not something the New Testament invented, and it is not something a medieval rabbi invented either. It is in Isaiah, 300 years before Jeremiah's jar, and it is already being used as a picture rather than as a report of the city's waste disposal. That is the place. That is the ravine. Hold it in your head, because a man is going to stand within sight of it and start using its name. And then Jeremiah, about a generation after Josiah, and the valley comes back. Chapter 7, verses 31 and 32. And they have built the high places of Tophet, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I commanded them not, neither came it into my heart. Therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that it shall no more be called Tophet, nor the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter, for they shall bury in Tophet till there be no place. Two things in that passage, and I want both of them. The first is the clause in the middle, which I commanded them not, neither came it into my heart. God says it 3 times in Jeremiah, chapter 7, chapter 19, chapter 32. I never commanded it, I never spoke it, it never entered my mind. He is disowning the practice in the strongest terms the language has, and he is doing it because apparently people had convinced themselves it was somehow required. Read that, and then think about how anybody could believe that of God. And then notice that they did, and that the prophets had to keep saying it. The second thing is the renaming. It shall no more be called the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. The place gets a new name in the mouth of the prophet. And the reason is that what was done there is going to come back around on the city. Jeremiah 19 has him taking a clay bottle down into that same valley, in front of the elders and the priests, and breaking it in the sight of them all, and saying, Even so will I break this people and this city, as one breaketh a potter's vessel that cannot be made whole again. He goes down to the place where children were burned, and he breaks a jar, and he says, This is what is coming to you. Now, how does a place name turn into a word? The same way it always does, and you already know how, because we do it constantly. There are place names in this country that stopped being places a long time ago and became something you say. You say the name, and nobody thinks about the town. They think about what happened there. A word made out of a wound. That is what happened to Gehenna. Over the centuries between Jeremiah and the New Testament, the name of that ravine, the place of child sacrifice, the place a prophet went to break a jar, the place a king wrecked with hammers, became the name for the worst thing anybody could imagine. And when the New Testament writers put it into Greek, they did not translate it. They carried it straight across, the way you carry a proper name. Gehenna in Hebrew comes out Gehenna in Greek. So this word is not like the other two. Sheol and Hades are common nouns, the place of the dead, a general term. Gehenna is the name of a specific ravine with a specific history, and every Jewish person who heard it in the 1st century knew exactly which one and what had happened in it. And your King James prints it hell, the same as the other two, and the reader in the pew has no idea that one of these 3 words is a location outside a specific city with a specific atrocity attached to it. 12 times that word appears in the New Testament. 11 of them are from one man. 12 occurrences. 11 of them on the lips of Jesus, and 1 in the letter of James, chapter 3, verse 6, about the tongue. Nobody else in the New Testament uses this word. Not Paul in 13 letters. Not Peter. Not John in the Gospel or the Epistles or Revelation. Not the writer of Hebrews. Paul never says Gehenna. Not once. That is worth sitting with for a second before we go on, whatever you make of it. Now, where does Jesus use it, and to whom? Matthew chapter 5, in the Sermon on the Mount, 3 times in one stretch. Verse 22, Whosoever shall say, Thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Verses 29 and 30, If thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out. Better that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. Matthew 10, verse 28. Fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Matthew 18, verse 9, repeating the eye and the hand. And Matthew 23, verse 33. And I want you to notice the audience on this one. Ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? That is spoken to the scribes and the Pharisees, the religious leadership, in the temple courts, in public, in the middle of the 7 woes. Go through the 11 and you will find that pattern more than once. This word is aimed at insiders far more often than at outsiders. It is not, in the Gospels, a word he spends on the crowd or on the Romans or on the woman at the well. Now Mark 9, which is the longest use of it and the one that quotes Scripture, verses 43 through 48. If thy hand offend thee, cut it off. It is better for thee to enter into life maimed than having 2 hands to go into hell, into the fire that never shall be quenched. And then the repeated line, where their worm dieth not, and the fire is not quenched. That line is a quotation. It comes from Isaiah chapter 66, verse 24, the very last verse of that book. And here is what Isaiah is describing there. And they shall go forth, and look upon the carcasses of the men that have transgressed against me. For their worm shall not die, neither shall their fire be quenched, and they shall be an abhorring unto all flesh. Carcasses, bodies outside the city, unburied, being consumed. That is a picture of a corpse field, not of a furnace room. And Jesus, standing in Jerusalem, quotes that line and attaches it to the name of the ravine outside the wall where bodies had in fact been thrown. The imagery lines up geographically. Isaiah's picture is outside the city. Gehenna is outside the city. That is not a coincidence, and it is why the two go together in that sermon. Now the thing I have to correct, and it is going to cost me some of you, and I am going to do it anyway. You have heard, I have heard it my whole life from good men, that Gehenna in Jesus' day was Jerusalem's garbage dump, that it burned continuously, that they threw refuse and the bodies of criminals in there, and the fires never went out. And that is why the imagery is fire and worms. I taught that more than once. Here is the problem. There is no first-century evidence for it. No ancient writer describes a burning rubbish dump in that valley. Not Josephus, who describes Jerusalem in enormous detail and had every reason to mention it. Not the Talmud. Not any archaeology anybody has produced. The earliest known source for the garbage dump claim is a rabbi named David Kimhi, writing a commentary around the year 1200, more than 1,000 years after Jesus. From there, it got into Christian commentaries, and from there into 1,000,000 sermons, including mine. Now let me be careful about what I am and am not saying, because this is where people overcorrect. I am not saying the valley was a nice place. It was not. It carried the memory of child sacrifice. Jeremiah renamed it the Valley of Slaughter, and predicted burials there till there be no place, and Josiah had defiled it with bones. The horror is real, and it is in the Bible. What is not in the Bible, and not in any source near the period, is the perpetually burning trash heap. So the image loses a detail and keeps its weight. The name still means the worst place. It just means it because of what was done to children there, which is worse than garbage anyway. And I have to tell you where I got it, because that is the whole lesson of this segment, and it is not about a rabbi in the 1200s. 2001, Memphis, a men's Sunday school class I taught for about 6 years. 20 of us in a room with folding chairs going through Mark. And I did the garbage dump. Confidently. With the detail about the fires never going out and the bodies of criminals, the whole thing. And I remember a man named Curtis saying, "Oh, that makes sense of it," and me feeling good about that. I did not get it from research. I got it from a study Bible footnote and from 3 sermons I had heard. And I did not check any of them, because it was the kind of fact that explains something, and those go down easy. 16 years later, I read a paper that laid out the sourcing, and I sat there in the back room in Memphis, feeling my ears go hot. Nobody was harmed by it. That is true, and it is not the point. The point is that I stood in front of 20 men for 6 years as the one who read, and I handed them something I had not checked, and Curtis went home and told somebody. So the rule I keep now, and it costs me time every single week. Before I use an illustration, I ask where it came from, and I go find out. If I cannot source it, I do not say it, or I say it and I say I cannot source it. That is not scholarship. It is just not passing along what I was handed without opening the bag. Word 4. And this one is a curiosity, because it happens exactly once in the entire New Testament. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness, to be reserved unto judgment. Cast them down to hell. In the Greek, that whole phrase, cast them down to hell, is one word, a single verb. And that verb is built on the name Tartarus. It occurs one time, in this verse, nowhere else in the New Testament, and it is not in the Greek Old Testament in this form either. Now, what did Tartarus mean to somebody reading Greek in the 1st century? It was not the general word for the realm of the dead. That was Hades, and we have already done Hades. Tartarus was below Hades. In the Greek poets, it is the deep place, and Homer describes it as being as far beneath Hades as heaven is above the earth. And critically, it is where certain divine beings were confined after a war in heaven, bound, held, kept. So Peter is writing in Greek to Greek-speaking readers, and he reaches for the one word in their vocabulary that means the deep holding place for bound, rebellious divine beings. And he uses it about angels that sinned. He could have said Hades. He does not. He uses this instead, once, deliberately. And look at what he puts around it. Delivered them into chains of darkness, to be reserved unto judgment, held, not punished and finished, held, awaiting something. Jude verse 6 says the same thing, without the Greek word, the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains, under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. 2 letters, same picture. Bound, in darkness, reserved until a day. Here is my honest limit on this one, and I have said it before on this channel. That tells you the picture in the writer's head. It does not give you a location, and neither letter offers one, and I am not going to supply one. And notice the other thing, which is the only thing that matters for tonight's count. This verse is not about people, it is about angels. In the one place, your King James prints hell for this word. The subject is not a human being at all. So now let me put all 4 side by side, the way I would lay tools out on a bench. Sheol, Hebrew. About 65 occurrences. The realm of the dead, where everybody goes. Jacob expects it. Job asks to be hidden in it. David is promised he will not be left there. Rendered hell, grave, and pit. Hades. Greek. Around 10 or 11 occurrences. The standard Greek rendering of Sheol, inherited from the Greek Old Testament. Paired with death everywhere in Revelation. Rendered hell, Gehenna. Greek, carried over from Hebrew. 12 occurrences, 11 from Jesus, 1 from James. Not a concept. The name of a ravine outside Jerusalem with a specific atrocity in its history. Rendered hell. Tartarus, Greek. 1 occurrence, as a verb, about angels. Rendered hell. 4 words. 4 different things. 1 English word on the page in front of you, every single time. That is the finding, and everything I have said tonight is checkable. And now, the verse I have been holding since the first minute. Revelation chapter 20. The great white throne. Verse 13. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them, and they were judged every man according to their works. Death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. Notice what that says. Whatever hell is in that sentence, it is holding people, and it hands them over. It empties out. It is a container being emptied. Then verse 14, and death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. Read that slowly. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. Hell was cast into the lake of fire. Now sit with what the English page just did to you. If hell and the lake of fire are the same thing, that sentence says a thing was thrown into itself. That is not a sentence. It cannot mean anything. So they are not the same thing. The English will not let them be. And the Greek word behind hell in both of those verses, verse 13 and verse 14, is Hades, which is the word we did in the middle of this hour. The realm of the dead, the Greek rendering of Sheol. The place Jacob expected to go, the place Job asked to be hidden in, the place David was promised he would not be left in. So what that passage says, in the words that are actually there, is, death and the realm of the dead give up everyone they are holding, and then death and the realm of the dead are themselves destroyed. The grave is emptied, and then the grave is thrown away. And the passage does not stop at verse 14. Let me read the next line too, because leaving it off would be exactly the kind of selective quoting I have spent an hour warning you about. Verse 14 ends, this is the second death. And verse 15, and whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. So the chapter names two things going into that lake, death and Hades in verse 14. And in verse 15, whosoever was not found written in the book of life. I am reading you the whole passage. I am not going to tell you what verse 15 means, and I am not going to soften it or sharpen it, because the moment I do that, I have crossed from counting words into arguing a doctrine, and I said I would not. What I will point out is the one thing that belongs in a translation video. Those are two different sentences about two different subjects, and the English word hell appears in the first one and not in the second one. Now I am going to stop right there, and I want to explain why. Because I can feel the pull of the next sentence, and I am not going to write it. There is a version of this video where I take that verse and build a doctrine on it. You can see the shape of it from here. It would get shared a great deal, and it would make somebody very angry, and it would make somebody else very happy. I am not doing it. I told you at the top that I would not argue the afterlife in any direction, and I meant it. And the reason is not caution. It is that this is a translation finding, and it can only carry a translation weight. What I have shown you tonight is that 4 words became 1 word. That is a fact about English Bibles, and anybody can check it in an evening. What happens to human beings after they die is a question that the whole church has been working on for 2,000 years, with better tools than mine. And I am a man who taught high school history in the Delta for 30 years and reads at a desk in Memphis. I am not going to settle it in the last 4 minutes of a video, and you should be suspicious of anybody who tries. What I will say, and this is the last thing I will say about it, is that if you have carried a picture in your head your whole life that came from 1 English word, doing the work of 4, then you have not been wrong so much as you have been underinformed. And there is a difference, and the fix is not a new doctrine. The fix is a concordance and an evening. 4 doors, 1 sign. Go read the doors. If you are still with me this late, let me give you the honest thing instead of the tidy one. I told you at the start about the young man at the funeral in 2018 who asked me where his grandmother was. And I told you, I handed him a stack of verses and called it an answer. I saw him again about 2 years later, at a hardware store of all places. And I told him the truth, which is that I do not know, and that the man who told him he did know had not counted the words. He did not seem disappointed. That surprised me. He said something like, "At least that is a real answer." My father's King James is on the shelf here beside me, the one I found when I cleaned out his library in 2011, with the margins written full. He has one note by Psalm 16, and it is 3 words I still cannot read. 31 years pastoring a small church out in the county, and I do not know what he thought about any of this, and I would give a great deal for one more Sunday phone call to ask him. Ruthie says I did not take up this subject for the young man. She may be right about that too. So let me close the file. What tonight settles, and every bit of it is checkable with a concordance. 4 words in the original languages come out as the single English word hell in the King James. Sheol, about 65 times in Hebrew, itself rendered 3 different ways: hell, grave, and pit. Hades, around 10 or 11 times in Greek, inherited from the Greek Old Testament as the standard rendering of Sheol. Gehenna, 12 times, 11 of them from Jesus and 1 from James, and it is the name of a real ravine outside Jerusalem with a documented history. And 1 verb built on Tartarus, 1 time, in 2 Peter, about angels. And the garbage dump story about that ravine has no source earlier than about the year 1200, which does not make the valley less terrible. It makes it terrible for the reason the Bible actually gives. What tonight does not settle: the doctrine of the afterlife. I did not argue it, I am not going to, and I told you why. What happens to anybody after death is not a question I can answer from a desk in Memphis, and no verse count settles it. And the fences, once plainly. No claim tonight about who goes where. No date. No claim about anybody's ancestry. And nothing here is an instruction of any kind. Here is the question I am leaving open, because I do not have the bottom of it. What other single English word in my Bible is covering more than 1 word underneath? Because that is the real thing tonight did to me. It is not about this subject. If it happened 4 times over on 1 word, it has happened elsewhere, and I do not have a list. Love is a candidate. Fear is a candidate. Servant. Word. Judge. I have started checking a few, and I am not finished, and I may not finish. So tell me in the comments, which English word are you going to go look under? I read the comments, and most of what I end up studying comes from something somebody left down there. And carry this out with you. A ravine on the south side of an old city, green now with paths in it, and a king who went down there once with hammers, so it could never be used for that again. Told. One last word before you go. Everything you heard tonight, I read from Scripture. I am not summoning anything, and I am not here to make you afraid of the dark. I am here to make you stand in awe of the God who rules it. I quote the King James Version unless I say otherwise. The shadow is real, but it is not the last word. He is.